Today I give you an update on my client Vivyen's cut, and we go deep into the emotional side of dieting. So if this is something you struggle with, don't go anywhere. Hey, this is Colin DeWaay. To really take your results to the next level, apply for my online coaching, link in the description. Alright, when we last left off, we were ending a 3-week diet break where I had taken her macros and gone back to what they were prior to the diet break. I did mention that she likes to do her double refeeds on Friday and Saturday, but I recommend that she either do them right away, so it basically extends the diet break for another 2 days, or wait till the end of the week, at least if it didn't mess with her too much mentally. And she decided to go ahead and extend the diet break and do it for 2 more days, so that essentially left 4 days of dieting with weigh-ins for the first week back. Now, some things to note: she only got 75 of her 125 minutes of cardio in because she was dealing with an ankle injury. However, her steps are actually up quite a bit from the week prior, so that probably more than makes up for that. All that being said, for week 17, she saw a ½ pound drop on the scale. And while that's not a lot of movement on the scale, it's still movement. And like I said, only being about a half a week back into things, I certainly didn't want to make any adjustments based on that. But we did make some changes based on some other things, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But first, Vivyen and I had a lot of back and forth this week talking about different things, and I wanted to talk to you about it because I think it could really help you if you struggle mentally. And it's more things to consider when you're dieting, especially if you're female and or you struggle with emotional eating. Vivyen mentioned in her check-in that her period was coming up again and that she tends to struggle with lower calories the week prior to her period because food focus really goes up. So what she was asking was if she could have another diet break, and this turned into a pretty big conversation. As I mentioned in the previous update, I'm pretty much never against a diet break, but in this case I wanted to make sure it made sense both from a mental and physical perspective. Physically, I really didn't want to get back into a diet break since we only had less than a week back into the cut, and we were just coming off of 3 weeks of diet break, so I didn't want it to be like basically just going through glycogen stores and never really tapping into the fat and then just jumping back into a diet break again. Mentally, it's because she was still concerned there may be some emotional stuff going on with food after she thought she was over it from what we did through our reverse together. But I wanted to challenge her on this a little bit, and the reason is because she thought she was going back into some disordered eating tendencies again. And this is because she was becoming a little bit more anxious about food. She was really thinking about what her next meals would be and things like that. So she mentioned that she enjoyed the diet break previously, but now that she's feeling it, she'd rather resolve these cycles rather than letting them repeat. And a trend that helped when we started working together was working on mindset, reducing triggers, and coping better. However, one of the things I wanted her to understand was just because she's starting to become more food focused doesn't necessarily mean she's going back to some disordered eating tendencies, because this is very much a normal response to dieting, especially once you've been doing it for a while. And it's purely hormonal, which gets exacerbated, especially when you're on your period. I mean, even for me, when I was on the end of my last cut, I was super food focused. Now, granted, this was a little different because it was towards the end of stage prep and I was super lean. But still, it was like I would eat a meal and I was practically counting down not only the hours, but the freaking minutes until I could eat again. I mean, I was highly food focused, and this is not an issue I have under normal circumstances. And that's because more food focus is just a normal physiological response and doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong. Now, that doesn't mean we just ignore it and say suck it up. It certainly depends. So what I told her was there's nothing wrong with going back into a diet break if she really wants, and what might be a good strategy is to take the diet break and then plan moving forward that we do 3 weeks of cutting followed by a week of diet break to kind of go on schedule with what her period will give her. And this can help since we already know she's going to be more food focused during that time. But I also wanted her to understand that there's a lot of value, and it's very powerful to push through difficult times and show yourself that you're capable of things. Nothing makes you grow stronger and more confident than showing yourself you can do things you didn't think you could do. And we cannot underestimate the importance of building these mental wins. That said, I did tell her if she does try this and it doesn't go well, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with her, that she shouldn't judge herself or anything like that. We certainly need to be able to know our patterns and what we mentally can and cannot take, but we can't know these things if we never try. And most of the time, we're capable of doing more than we give ourselves credit for. So building these wins can really help in other areas besides just the dieting and build momentum. So that's why it's so important that if you try something like this and it doesn't go well, you don't beat yourself up. There's nothing wrong with you. And in this case, we would just use it as a learning experience and know that pushing during this time is probably not very smart. I'm telling you, we gotta stop over-judging ourselves all the time. Anyway, with all that said, I basically told her that I wanted her to make this decision based on what she thought was best, knowing that there's no right or wrong answer. And she decided, which honestly I was pretty happy about, that she wanted to make this push for the mental benefits, not just to show herself she could do it, but also she knows that the root problem isn't just calories. So she likes to journal. She feels like it helps her, which I love. So she's gonna step that up. She's aware of what the problem is, and that's step one. And then step two is stepping up to the plate, and she's doing that too. And that makes me happy. So anyway, with all that said, going into the following week, we did make some changes because like I said, she's having some problems with her ankle and I don't want to push that and make it worse. So I reduced her target cardio from 125 minutes to 75 minutes and told her not to do anything she thought might make it worse. If she thought doing any cardio would make it worse, not to do it. And it would probably be a good idea to keep the steps down just to make sure. So with that, to compensate, I reduced her calories some by about 87 by reducing her carbs by 15 and her fat by 2. And the good news is she was able to get through this week without falling off, and that's a huge mental win. And honestly, in my opinion, way bigger than any physical progress is the mental progress we make, not only because the mental progress is what brings the physical progress, but the mental progress is what's going to lead to the most happiness. She did have some bigger ups and downs a few days than normal for her, but this is why we do an average for the week instead of looking at individual days. And her average was pretty spot on, which is what matters the most. And this is why I like taking the average, because it helps get away from the all or nothing approach. If we look at this day where things got off, if you were taking the all or nothing approach and you got too tied up into singular days, what often happens is you have a day like this, you beat yourself up, you feel guilty, and it just spirals from there and it turns into this big thing. When you know you just have to kind of roughly average for the week, it makes it much easier to be more flexible. Now, as far as weight loss goes for the week, she actually gained 0.3 pounds. But it was her period week, and if we look back, one thing that we've learned is her weight is typically elevated by a couple pounds during that week. So there's a decent chance we'll see a nice drop when things settle down to normal. And this is just such an important thing for women to remember, because most of the time you are going to see an increase on the scale during this time, and it's just water weight. So we know it's not going to be accurate during this time, but even then, especially at a kind of heightened emotional time, that can be difficult to be objective with. So if you do really struggle with it, it's a good idea, in my opinion, just to avoid the scale during this time until things settle, so you don't let it mess with you mentally, which will only make it more likely to do things not in your best interest. Vivyen mentioned that she did have to do more journaling on some days where she was struggling a bit more, but she had an idea for her triggers for her binging, and writing it down makes it more predictable, so she's aware when she's more vulnerable. Smart. And another strategy that I like that coincides pretty well with this is talking to yourself out loud, or just saying things out loud, because when you're struggling, if it's in your head, if you let everything in your head kind of become reality, it's not good, because when it's in your head, you're emotional. It's all emotion inside your head. When it comes out loud, it then becomes logic. So for her, this is what journaling does. It's a way of getting it out and making it more logical. Saying things out loud does the same thing, and it's kind of like what Gary Vee says, if you ever saw that. It's like, you gotta get the poison out. If you leave it in, it just festers and poisons you. Get that poison out, and you feel way better, and you can move forward. So with all that said, going into week 20, we're just gonna leave things the same. We're gonna give her ankle a little bit more time. She said it was feeling quite a bit better, but I don't wanna rush back into things. So we'll leave things the same for now, see how she's feeling, see how the progress goes, and we'll just take it from there the following week. Now do this next. Check out this top video to see how fast is too fast to lose weight. If you're interested in online coaching for yourself, apply at the link in the description. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.